In the center of the planet, there sleeps the great Earth Dragon, a being of incomprehensible might. So immense is his power that even his dreams change the world, granting special individuals on the surface extraordinary powers beyond those of mortal men. This is the Earth of the Mirage universe, and you're listening to the Mirage Barrage. Being a supervillain is hard. Now, if you're the run-of-the-mill street-level supervillain, it might not be too bad. Petty crime won't attract too much attention, and if you play your cards right and don't draw too much attention to yourself, you'll be alright. The problem is when you get to be a street-level supervillain and you let the power go to your head. A lot of idiots think, oh, I can shoot lasers out of my face and I'm indestructible. I am now a god. And then they go on a rampage and naturally get taken down because people don't like it when you do that. It's kind of absurdly common. You would think people would learn, but I suspect that because almost everyone has a unique power, they think, sure, the other guys got caught, but that's because they didn't have my awesome power. I mean, yes, this line of thinking is still dumb, but people do this, so they must be thinking something, dumb as it may be. Now, of course, the problem is there's usually a stronger hero that can be called in, and even if you're really powerful, then the heroes can just call in two more. The reason heroes beat these villains is because of organization and teamwork. They identify the problem and then send in the force necessary based on their unique powers and their distance from the emergency. Plus, heroes have backup in the form of law enforcement. So, if you're a smart, low-level supervillain, your best friend is staying under the radar. Don't get caught and don't draw enough attention to bring in the big guns. Sure, it's not the most glamorous lifestyle for someone who's supposed to be a supervillain, but that's really the best-case scenario. See, once you get caught, you're in the system, and they're going to document your powers and keep a closer eye on you. Plus, someone somewhere will be in charge of creating plans on how to take you specifically down if you return to crime again. So the second battle is probably going to be even shorter than the first one. But of course, there are more than street-level criminals. Now again, the problem that was facing those small-timers is organization and teamwork. The next level up of villains realize this, and they adopt similar strategies. But you still have to lay relatively low. For example, Al Capone's greatest weapon was not the violence he could unleash or the murders he was responsible for. He is suspected of being directly responsible for the deaths of about 30-some people, which, yeah, it's a lot, but it's quite small in the grand scheme of things. No, his greatest weapon was bribery, and perhaps his weakness was his notoriety. Future mob bosses would not be as public as Capone, who did like a bit of the spotlight. Unfortunately for them, many supervillains also like the spotlight, and it tends to be their undoing. Shockingly, if you're going to give yourself an exaggerated name and a fancy costume, you like to be seen. But let's talk about the real threats. When you get to be big enough, you have different considerations. If you're a full-on proper warlord or dictator, you have the advantage of total control over your country or region. However, if you're in a more civilized part of the world, even if you have money and power, like Anton Griffin, that's not going to be enough in and of itself. The problem is, simply put, that facts are facts. It's very difficult to be behind something, especially something big, and not leave any evidence at all. For example, if Griffin Industries decides to make an intentionally defective product, there will be traces left behind. Design documents, memos, and perhaps emails from employees who have noticed the flaw and try to bring it to your attention. Now, these won't be threats immediately. For the immediate future, these are all internal, and they aren't going to just wind up in the public eye. However, if someone starts investigating, they might find something. Now yes, you can try to destroy the evidence, but with a big organization that becomes tricky. Generally speaking, the more complicated a machine, the more points of failure are possible. So you really have to hope that no one misfiled a memo or anything so that you can go back, find it, and destroy it, as well as every other copy. God forbid if someone made a note that you didn't know about. Now, even if you get lucky and do destroy every piece of incriminating information, you might find a new problem. Documents you are legally obligated to have suddenly no longer exist, and there you've got a fine. This is especially true if you've been meddling with your finances, for example. Now, the more complicated and large your scheme is, the more evidence risks being found. So, if you're Anton Griffin, what do? Well, first, you accept that some % loss is inevitable. Maybe you have to pay a few fines. Maybe you have to accept that 1 or 2 instances of misconduct will come to light. In fact, maybe you want that to happen. If they catch you for something minor, you might be able to satiate those investigating from searching for something even bigger. So long as you're careful. But most important of all, you need allies. Face it, if the whole might of the justice system and the government were perfectly applied against you, they would probably find out what they need to put you away. But, as Anton Griffin would say, that's the beauty of the world. Nothing ever works perfectly. So, you make a few senators get what they want, and make sure that you're greasing the palms of the military-industrial complex, and suddenly, it's going to cost some important people more to see you fall than it does to prop you up. Some records can be sealed, some hearings made private, and certain interpretations of the facts preferred. For instance, if you had previously worked with an assassin who you supplied with xenocyte in order for them to kill a famous hero, and then that assassination failed, and then that hero tracked the assassin back to your plane, where the two of them now are, and you told the assassin, hey, this is now your chance, but they failed yet again. Then you pretend that the assassin actually stole the xenocyte from you, and rightfully point out that the hero is trespassing as an excuse so that you can drop them out of the back of the plane. Well, someone might believe you were acting in self-defense. But here's the thing. Even though you might not have been able to hear what Karma was shouting over the wind noise on the camera feeds, someone could reasonably interpret the shock and outrage on her face. Not really what you'd expect from a thief, but something you might expect from, say, a betrayal. And I mean, isn't it a coincidence that the assassins stole xenocyte from you just so that they could kill one of the heroes you famously clashed with? It's not that hard to find an excuse to investigate. But if you have some friends, they have enough wiggle room to spin your actions as actually very reasonable and then block anyone from looking too far into the matter, even though you did just toss a hero out of the back of your plane. Now, to be fair, in this case, it really does help that the hero was trespassing, so if anyone really pressed into the matter, you have a ready counterattack. You say, hey, don't look too much into the fact that I kicked her out of the back of the plane, and I won't bring up the fact that she was trespassing. Of course, for our story, the legalities and complications of the matter aren't all that important at the moment, and they especially weren't that important to Karma and Greta Alhross, seeing as they had just been ejected from said plane and were now hurtling towards the ground. The high-tech handcuffs connecting Greta's left arm to Karma's right made things even more difficult. The two fell chaotically, tangling up with each other as the weight of the other unwilling skydiver pulled them this way and that. Realizing the chaos caused by the other, they reached out to try to stabilize themselves. They came to a relative calm as they grasped each other's arms, both face down with their heads next to each other, their legs outstretched to either end of their two-person rope. Karma tried to shout something over the wind. Even as close as they were, Greta couldn't hear it. What? Fly! Karma shouted again. I can't! Greta yelled back furiously. If it hadn't been for Karma's bullet, she still would have been able to fly, and Greta had a small sense of satisfaction that this would ironically doom the assassin. Of course, that was quickly swept away with the wind at the realization that it would still take her as well. Eyes watering, Greta realized she had to try something, even if she couldn't fly. Maybe Dr. Phelps' ridiculous idea of alternating between feet wasn't such an absurd idea after all. Or maybe it was and she didn't have much choice. Greta shifted until she was vertical, falling feet first. Suddenly, her narrower outline meant she was falling much faster. She fell down past Karma and dragged her down as well, who was ripped from side to side at the sudden change with no warning. The weight behind Greta, flailing back and forth as Karma still tried to hold a horizontal position, was yanking her side to side and made it harder to aim. But as long as she was pointing vaguely up, that's all she needed right now. Greta released a shockwave from her right foot, and she suddenly shot upwards. She whipped past Karma, and it was her turn to be yanked around as Karma fell below her. A confused moment of the two of them circling each other, limbs flailing, passed before Karma's hand found Greta's arm. Their eyes met, but now Greta was falling with her back facing the ground, while Karma was still looking down. Their arms were crossed, holding onto each other, and it was awkward and straining, but neither of them dared to let go and make things worse. Greta's long white hair shot upwards past her face, obscuring her vision. "We have to work together," Karma shouted at her. Even as she was shouting to be heard, the tone sounded distinctly irritated. "And what are you going to do?" Greta shot back. She just barely saw Karma roll her eyes before releasing the grip on her left hand and spinning Greta around so she was facing down again. The motion was violent and unsettling, but the two grabbed onto each other again, now face to face once more. "Try again, this time when I'm in position," Karma ordered. Greta was going to retort something, but a quick glance at the rapidly approaching ground changed her mind. She might only get one chance at this. With no idea what Karma had in mind, but the assurance that she didn't want to die any more than Greta, she slowly started to change position once more. This time more carefully, so Karma had time to react. The acceleration was still violent and sudden, but Karma was ready for it. Carefully, she held herself horizontally, face up, spreading out her arms and legs. Greta had to extend her arms as well because of the handcuffs, but she was still falling too fast relative to Karma. Suddenly understanding what was happening, Greta quickly reached out with her right arm and yanked Karma's left, so that the wind didn't push the other woman sideways. Limbs outstretched in all directions, with Greta's head digging into her back, Karma was spreading herself out to create more drag. It wouldn't slow them much, but Greta realized it would hold her in a downward-facing position, acting as something like a stabilizer. With this revelation, she launched another shockwave. Her head buried itself into Karma's back, and they wobbled dangerously. For a second, Greta was convinced they were going to flip over entirely, but she quickly twisted her legs around and slid back into a vertical position. Bracing herself, she tried again. This time she was more ready for the shockwave and didn't tilt nearly as far. They also slowed for just a second, but they were still very high up. After a couple of more shockwaves, Greta got the hang of it, but realized she was tiring quickly. She still didn't have her full stamina. "We have to wait," she shouted to Karma. "What?" she shouted back. She heard, she just didn't believe what had been said. Greta didn't bother trying to explain. Communicating was hard enough as it was. She had to let the ground get closer before decelerating. Continuing to do these shockwaves now would just slow them down and mean she got too tired too high and they'd just pick up speed again. As they continued to fall, Greta realized that Karma's arm span felt a bit longer than it had a moment ago. She remembered how she could slightly alter her bodily proportions and realized that she must be trying to get every inch of surface area possible to increase the drag. Still, the 10 seconds or so she needed to wait passed by like an eternity. Greta wasn't sure when was right. She just knew she couldn't try too high or too low. They were falling into some sort of desert, so no one area looked better to land in than any other to her. As her nerves continued to ramp up, she abruptly decided that she would rather risk slowing while she was too high than too low. She launched a shockwave with her right, then with her left leg. She kept pumping her legs back and forth so that the shockwaves wouldn't cancel each other out. It was working, but it was jarring with the sudden starts and stops. Greta tried to get into a groove, slowly disengaging one foot while slowly engaging the other, but at first that would just mean one slightly canceled out the other. She compensated by extending her legs out to either side as she started up or slowly ended the output of force. It was like she was air roller skating, except she was falling downwards and it felt awkward as anything. But the descent was slightly smoother to her relief. Unfortunately, they weren't slowing fast enough. They were descending at a safe speed, but definitely not a comfortable one. "Get ready to roll," Greta shouted. The wind was much quieter now, and the shout was clearly audible. How?" Karma asked, suddenly realizing her position was becoming precarious. Actually, as they slowed down, Karma had less rapid air moving to use as drag, and was starting to fall into line with Greta, but behind her back. But with Greta doing her air roller skating technique, she was bobbing from side to side, and without the stabilizer, they were going to tumble into a mess. Realizing this as the ground seemed to rush up faster than ever before, Greta used the momentum of one push to spin herself around, holding her handcuffed arm above her head. The two pirouetted like they were dancing, only for Greta to grab onto Karma, launching the last massive burst of energy that she could muster, and then tumbling sideways. They hit the sand, one toppling on top of the other for several feet until they finally came to a stop, covered in sand, with Karma lying on top of Greta. They both laid there for a moment, taking in the aches and pains of the sudden stop and the halting journey beforehand. Suddenly, Greta pushed Karma off of her. Karma was yanked to a halt by the handcuffs, otherwise she would have flown several feet from Greta. Karma grunted in pain as her shoulder yanked her body to a stop. Before she could do anything else, both women jumped in surprise as the ground shook with an impact. Both glanced around and didn't see anything at first, until one of the containers from the plane fell about 400 feet away and shattered into bits. They looked up to see a couple more, and scattered on all fours out of the way, Greta yanking Karma along. But the last one fortunately fell quite some distance away, doing little more than sending a plume of sand skyward and rattling their nerves. "Careful there," Karma said, wincing in pain. "Not all of us are so durable." "You're welcome," Greta spat back. "For what?" "For taking the brunt of the fall." Karma brushed some of the sand off of herself. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "We didn't make such a bad team in a pinch." "Don't get used to it," Greta said, sitting up and holding the handcuffs up to her vision. "Careful," Karma warned, but she needn't have worried. Greta focused precisely and lanced out with a quick laser beam from her eye, but the handcuffs didn't budge. They didn't even glow with the heat. In frustration, Greta tried again, unleashing both blue and green beams from her left and right eye respectively, but she only had the energy for a quick burst, which once more did nothing. "Griffin must have made them to resist your beams," Karma noted sourly. "He had all this planned." Greta wanted to retort that it was unlikely and that she was just low on energy, but she also didn't want to show her weakness in front of the assassin who had tried to murder her. "You knew I was going to sneak onto the plane?" Greta asked skeptically. "Not really," Karma admitted. "But Anton seemed to think it was likely. Guess he has a knack for these things." Greta grabbed Karma's costume and pulled her up close. "Why did Anton want to kill me?" "I suppose for the obvious reasons," Karma said coolly. "But during the Battle of Armageddon? I guess he saw an opportunity." "Why did he approach you?" Karma shrugged. "I guess I had the skills he was looking for. Now, if you don't mind, let's let the past rest for a bit and focus on the present." Greta had no intention of letting it slide that easily. This woman had tried to kill her, after all. "Should I focus on what I should do with you? You already tried to kill me once. Dragging you around is asking for trouble." "You wouldn't kill a defenseless prisoner." "I don't need to. I can restrain you or knock you out." "Don't be silly. Then you'll have to drag me everywhere you go. Like it or not, we're stuck with each other and have to work together." As mature as it may have sounded, Greta couldn't just agree to the murderess's suggestion, and it also irritated her that she was accepting the situation so calmly. Yeah, work together until you can get your hands on some xenosite from one of the crates and try to kill me again." "What? You're being ridiculous. Then I would have to drag you around. It would serve no purpose to kill you now. Besides, if I did find my way back to some populated area, what would I expect dragging the corpse of a well-known hero behind me? I'd be arrested, or worse, on the spot. We're stuck together. And you're just all right with that." "It doesn't matter what I'm all right with," Karma said condescendingly. "This is the hand I've been dealt, and we have to make the most of it." "It doesn't bother you that we were betrayed and we're stuck in the middle of the desert?" "Of course it bothers me, but what can I do about it? The only thing you or I can do now is to focus on what can be done. Griffin outthought both of us, so our best chance now is to find a way to get these handcuffs off, get somewhere civilized, and go our separate ways." "Excuse me, what? You tried to kill me, and you think I'm just going to let you go?" "Look, either you agree to let me go when we find a city, or I'm just going to play dead weight out here. You don't know how far you are from the nearest town, and Ashvelians have to eat and drink like the rest of us. If I'm weighing you down, I wouldn't give you much of a chance." "You wouldn't make it then either," Greta pointed out. "Oh yes, because I have so much to look forward to if you take me in. Life in prison, or worse, is so much to look forward to after all." "It would still be life." "Maybe. But not if Anton thinks I'm going to talk it wouldn't be," Karma countered. "If I want to live any life worth living, it has to involve my freedom at the end of the road." "You can't seriously expect me to go along with this." In reply, Karma sat down and crossed her legs on the sand. "Your choice." You'd rather starve to death than face whatever death Anton might have in store for you. Miss Alhross, you have to grow up. I've set out the stakes, and I have some, however minor, leverage in this situation. It's a simple yes or no proposition. Okay, and what if I said yes and I lie? I'm betting on your naivete to eliminate that possibility. Greta laughed. I fight scumbags like you on a daily basis. I'm not nearly as naive as you seem to think. Karma raised an eyebrow, but said nothing else. Greta decided to call her bluff. She started walking off in a random direction, pulling Karma from her seated position. Although being dragged on her back across the rough sand, Karma didn't complain, nor did she move. After about 100 feet, Greta felt herself start to sweat. The fall, the fight before, and the hospital had all left her weak. Karma really did have an unfortunate amount of leverage here. She'd have to bide her time until she was stronger. Fine. Let's say I won't turn you in, Greta said, stressing the hypothetical. What exactly are you going to contribute to our partnership? I am quite resourceful, Karma simply said. Do we have a deal? Fine. Say it. If you help me, I won't turn you in once we reach civilization, Greta growled. Excellent. Then my first suggestion would be that we check one of the fallen containers, so you can find xenosite. Xenosite will be the least useful thing we could find, unless you think you could use it to strengthen yourself. I don't know the frequency for that kind of thing. Then let's not go experimenting, shall we? If you get hurt, we'll both be in trouble. No, I was thinking of finding out what else might be in those containers. Perhaps something in them, or part of the containers themselves, could be used to shade us from the sun. I doubt we'd be fortunate enough to get food or water, but we might find something to make a signal flare, or find out where we are. All right, fine, Greta said, thinking that a signal flare might attract some authorities who could take care of Karma for her. Then she wouldn't be the one turning Karma over. It would just happen to be an inevitable result. The two started off towards where they had seen the containers fall. The first couple did indeed contain xenosite, and they steered well clear to be safe. The third one they were more lucky at. I don't suppose you have any idea what these are for? Karma asked, staring at the debris of electronic bits. Greta shook her head. No, but we should see if there's anything we can use. There were tarp materials that they quickly cut up into hoods to keep themselves out of the sun. Unfortunately, the things didn't breathe and weren't very comfortable. Still, it was better than nothing. All in all, they had been lucky. The desert wasn't as scorching hot as they had expected. Being late winter, the desert was hot, but hardly unbearable. They had also been lucky that the heat they experienced was dry one, which meant that they lost less water to it. They didn't find anything they thought could make a flare, but did grab some reflective bits in case they could use them to signal someone that might fly overhead, for example. Perhaps the most useful thing they found was a GPS that was built into one of the electronic things scattered about. They were exceptionally lucky that it still worked, though they had to scrounge for batteries before they could turn it on. Karma got the thing working and flicked some switches to narrow in on their location. Greta took a sharp breath. The Sahara. We're in the mother of all deserts, she said. Quite, Karma commented ruefully. And quite far from any cities or towns. We've effectively been left out to die. It can't be hopeless, Greta insisted. Hopeless? No, just exceptionally difficult. The closest real landmark is the Mediterranean, and that's roughly, well, a great deal north. Now, if I remember right, humans can't go without water for more than about 2 days. She looked over to Greta. Same here, if that's what you're asking. Under ideal circumstances, we might make it there. These aren't ideal circumstances. Dunes are going to be a problem. Terrain will make things difficult. And if it gets hotter, we're going to have a problem. Plus, we're not exactly at full strength. True, Karma agreed. But we don't have many options. If we can make it to the sea, we'll have plenty of water. We'll have to distill it. Hardly a problem. I saw plenty of materials we could use here. All we need to do is collect them. Okay, next problem. Which way is north? Karma frowned and looked back at her GPS. It did not have a compass built into it, so they had no idea which way they were facing. Not a problem. We can start walking in one direction until we see our position change on the GPS. Then we can see which way we were headed and adjust our course accordingly. Greta raised an eyebrow. It wasn't a terrible idea, actually, but she had just thought of a much more efficient one. Or we just check which way the sun is rising, and that'll tell us which way is east. And then we can start making progress right now. Is that wise? Traveling right now, in the day, in the desert? Call me paranoid, but I'd rather be able to see you. Also, it's really not that hot out. We might as well. Might get rather cold at night, the temperature this moderate. But fair enough. After collecting materials from the various containers, they did indeed set out right away. But they hadn't gone very far before exhaustion settled in. Greta was particularly tired, especially after a long night before. The adrenaline of waiting to apprehend Karma had worn off, and there was nothing to do but walk. The desert was quiet, nearly silent, with only the occasional gust of wind making any sound at all. It was early afternoon when the both of them finally gave in, made a quick shelter against the wind, and settled down for the night. Karma fell asleep first, and even though Greta was exhausted, she couldn't quite do the same. Karma had her hands under her head, while Greta was sitting. It was awkward, her own cuffed hand uncomfortably close to Karma's face. Greta found the idea of sleeping next to her really weird. She didn't like Karma, obviously, but she found it was for more than just the obvious reason. Karma's strange, aloof attitude and utilitarian mindset somehow bothered her. She had given logical reasons on why she could be trusted while they were stuck together, but they didn't really click with Greta. Maybe it was the detached way Karma had processed their situation, but Greta found that her way of expressing herself to be fundamentally untrustworthy. Greta wasn't sure of what would happen if she closed her eyes. Half of her fully believed Karma would just go on sleeping. She needed sleep for the journey too, right? The other half of her felt like it was about as safe as sleeping next to a viper, and that as soon as she let her guard down, Karma was going to coil up and strike. Greta never decided which one of these she favored. Exhaustion won out, and she dozed off without realizing it. It was many hours later, the sun slowly starting to rise, when Greta awoke with a shiver. Karma had been right about the temperature. It was actually cold once the sun had fallen below the horizon. Now that it was rising again, she felt a few rays of warmth. Karma was stirring, perhaps the cold wind waking her as well. Greta tugged on her handcuffs, yanking Karma's hands out from under her head. Karma abruptly awoke and froze in place as soon as her eyes opened. For a brief instant, she laid stock still, only her wide eyes moving, taking in every detail of the situation. She looked like some sort of lizard, Greta couldn't help but think. She wasn't moving, and she was stretched out, and one should get the impression that she was helpless. But the wide darting eyes and stiff coiled muscles immediately instead made Greta think of a predator. And then it was gone. As if everything had come back in an instant, Karma relaxed, stretched, and sat up. "Ready to go?" she asked with a slight smile. An offer of, well, maybe not friendship, but cooperation at least. Greta nodded. "Great, no time to lose." They packed up the supplies they needed, Greta slinging the pack over her shoulder. She was planning on carrying everything, since she was obviously stronger, but as they set out, she quickly found that what should have been a paperweight was a bit heavier than she expected. That it should have been. This was nothing, and yet she was struggling. "I'll take some," Karma finally stated, not leaving it open to discussion. "I'm fine," Greta huffed, betraying the truth. "Like you said to me earlier, you took the brunt of the fall, and you're not in top shape. I'll take some." Karma reached over and grabbed a few things, which instantly reduced the challenge to almost nothing for Greta. She scowled despite that. It was very hard not to remind Karma that the reason she was at less than optimal shape was her own fault. But she felt that somehow this was treading old ground. Or maybe that it just wouldn't do any good. Or maybe that she was just tired of being tired and wanted to get on with the journey. Trudging through the sand was surprisingly difficult. Each step was easy, but it began wearing at them and slowing them down faster than either had expected. While they had used Greta's trick with the sun to give them a good indication of which way was north, they made some minor corrections to their track based on what they saw in their GPS. It was becoming apparent that Karma's 2-day estimate was beyond optimistic. 3 days might not even be possible. A few hours into it, and Greta was getting stir-crazy from the awkward silence between them. She was chained by the wrist to this woman, and so they were forced to walk side by side, but Karma didn't speak. Her face, still looking as if it were painted on, but not in the least smudged by sleep or sand, kept pointing straight ahead and remained implacable. She clearly didn't mind the strange silence. But Greta finally had enough. So, why do you call yourself Karma? She asked. The question had been on her mind for a while. Karma shrugged. Don't think too hard about it. But I suppose I chose the name at one point because I try to rebalance the scales, keep everything in line. By killing people. No way scales are being imbalanced there. No bad karma on you. Karma laughed. Don't take it as some sort of grand philosophical statement. It's much simpler. The worst of humanity comes out when the system, whatever system it is, breaks down. Change, and, not to be grand about it, but chaos, are more often bad than good. So if someone's interfering in the status quo, trying to start a revolution, undermine the corporation, or just causing a bit of unwanted trouble, I'm more than happy to take them out. For a price. Girls gotta live. And I'm quite good at what I do. You're a gun for hire, and you think you're helping the world. I don't particularly care if I'm helping. I'm making sure things work. Things are the way they are because they work. If something didn't work, it wouldn't stick around. So you're saying, you think what you're doing makes the world work. Keeps it working a little. Keeps the world working. And you don't care about what is working? If a dictator is in power, that's working? Police states are named that for a reason. Less crime, more security. Historically, concentrated power structures are those that last the longest. Without them, people inevitably go savage and kill each other. Not always. Yes, always. You've had the benefit of living in a nation which provides law and order, and so do most developed nations. The Soviets and the Chinese do it too. You've spent your time in the world that works. And you don't realize how if a few legs of that structure were removed, how quickly it would fall into anarchy. You really think, on some level, what you're doing is good. I tend not to put too much stock in the concepts of good and evil. The terms are outdated. No, they're not. There are still rights and wrongs. Just because the world is complicated and it's not black and white, doesn't mean right and wrong don't exist. Even if everything's shades of gray, well, some shades are darker than others. Cute, Karma smiled. But you asked me what I believe. I told you. I have no interest in debate. It's just going to waste time while we're out here. So, what if someone wanted to kill the president, for example? Much of your government's real power is behind the scenes nowadays, so really, killing the president wouldn't change much in all likelihood. But to your point, I wouldn't assassinate a leader of a nation, someone with real power. The more power, the less likely I'd do it. So, president maybe, but dictator no. You're very judgmental. I don't think this conversation is going to help us survive. How can we build trust if we don't understand each other? This isn't building trust. Staying silent certainly isn't either. President maybe, if there was a good enough reason, and dictator probably no. And you're really okay with that? Yes. Look what happened when your government overthrew New Uruk. One evil dictator down, but violence and terrorism went up. Greta shook her head. I'm not going to talk politics with you. Anyone with any sense knows the situation is complicated. Everything is politics, my dear. It's quite amazing how some of you in the West can delude yourselves into thinking some things are apart from it. What? Okay, how is, say, soccer, for example, political? In England, King Edward III and IV banned football because it was distracting people from their practice of archery, which was itself a minor revolution in warfare. And war, of course, is politics. The sport was actually banned numerous times in the country, but that's merely one example. Yeah, that's not a stretch at all. Karma smiled sadly and shook her head. Think what you will. Greta processed that for a bit, when suddenly she realized something. You pick your targets. Karma caught on fast. Not all of them, no. Anton Griffin didn't come to you. You came to him. That's why Gorger had no idea about the operation. Really, this conversation can't end well. No, hang on, there's too many questions here. Greta actually stopped, pulling Karma to a halt. We've never run into each other, and as far as I can tell, neither have any other Ashvalians. So why on earth would you go to Anton for the Xenocyte? Because that's what you did, didn't you? Why did you want to kill me? To be fair, I wasn't gunning for you specifically. Oh, yes, my mistake. You were only gunning for my family. Much better. Karma sighed, looking irritable. You're really not going to let this go? Not on your life. Let's just say I thought you and your compatriots were too powerful. Too powerful! Greta stared at her for a moment, then burst into laughter. You won't kill a dictator with absolute power, but a couple of aliens flying around, that's too much power. Annoyance flashed across Karma's face. It's quite different, and if you'd take a moment to think, you'd realize why. You and the other Ashvelians, while theoretically restrained by your government, are ultimately individual beings with the power to affect the world stage. If one of you gets into a mood, all it takes is a little effort on your part, and the world is suddenly shaken from its foundations. Greta wasn't laughing anymore. Never has Captain Cosmos, or any of us, done something like that, and we're hardly the only ones with power. You wanted my reasoning. I gave it, Karma said, clearly trying to avoid the conversation. You were a dangerous threat, potential or otherwise, to all of us who walked in your shadow. You have powers too. You use them all the time. There's such a thing as power levels, sweetheart. I just brought you down a little closer to our level. You would think that it would make you understand empathy and all that. I understand that you hurt me, and now I can't be the hero I used to be. The presumption. Strength is not a virtue. Neither is weakness. You don't get to do what you want just because you're weaker. If I was at full strength, I could help more weak people. And there it is, the arrogance. It is so ingrained into you that you can't help but see everyone else as inferior. That is not a shame, because as I understand it, your new I-beam would be a useful tool against others of your breed. What? Well, imagine, what if your new Scouter Supreme decided it was best to preemptively strike a group of powards with dangerous ideas? The xenocyte radiation from your beams would make short work of her. Scouter Supreme would never do that. She's a good person, and she'd sacrifice everything to save people, just like the captain, and just like I would. We do what we do because it's right. And how do you know all of this? Your loyalty to her is impressive, if unconvincing. You didn't answer my question. Wait, my I-beams could be used against Comrade Cosmos. He's an Ashvelian. Oh, please, you want to destabilize the world order? What? Comrade Cosmos is literally oppressing people and trying to overthrow nations. I gotta stop him. And start a nuclear war in the process. Who said anything about starting wars? I said I was going to stop them. Of course you were. It's called escalation, my dear. Here's how this would play out. The cosmonaut would make his move, and you'd fight back with your Ashvelian killing beam. He would die, or be seriously injured, and the Soviets would see this as a disproportionate blow, and would retaliate. Then the Americans escalate, and so on and so forth until whoever remains is choking on the nuclear fallout. Congratulations, you've just started World War III. No, I didn't. I would have just been protecting people. I didn't start it. You know full well what would happen, and so you'd be responsible. Don't pretend otherwise. You've been in this business too long to be ignorant of tactics or strategy. There's a difference between doing something well and doing something good. What? You need to practice your speech. You're not making sense. There's a difference between doing something well, like having technique, balancing on a ledge, or using strategy, and doing something good. Doing something that's right, or doing something for the right reasons. You always have a choice to do the right thing, and so does everyone else. If you do something wrong, it's because you made that choice. You are so naive. And that is the real reason you're weak. Karma didn't say anything. She stood for a while, one arm awkwardly on her hip, with the other still cuffed to Greta. She didn't quite glare, but examined the Ashvelian for a long time. Finally, she gestured for them to keep walking. Greta followed her lead in silence. They didn't speak for the rest of the day, but continued onward in a steady pace. As the sun began to set, they made camp and settled in to sleep through the night. It must have been because the desert was so quiet that the sound of a plane awoke Greta early the next morning. It took a moment for her groggy mind to realize what the sound was, but as soon as it clicked, she snapped awake. Come on, get up, she said excitedly as she yanked on the cuffs, ripping Karma from her sleep. Greta looked away as she woke up, not wanting to see that disquieting reptilian gaze again. What is it? Karma asked, sounding as if she had been awake for hours. Plane. We gotta signal it. Karma immediately got out the reflective pieces as the two rushed out into the open. It was easy to spot the black outline of the plane in the clear desert sky, and immediately the two went about trying to catch the sun's rays at just the right angle. The plane was already past them, going east, but they tried as best they could. Greta started hopping up and down and waving the signal, even though she knew it would make little difference. The plane kept its straight course, still heading away. Karma said, "Look here, you imbeciles!" Greta threw down her reflective lens and raised her free hand. Without waiting for Karma's questions, she shot up a brilliant concussive beam into the air. The pillar of pinkish-red light soared upwards for hundreds of feet before Greta refrained to save her energy. Karma held her breath, but it looked like nothing changed. "Wait, what's that?" Greta asked. Karma narrowed her eyes, then saw them too. A few black spots were drifting down from the plane. A moment later, and they saw parachutes unravel. The two women glanced at each other in surprise, then looked back towards the horizon. Whatever the plane had dropped, they were going to land beyond a sand dune. "Well, what are we waiting for?" Greta asked. "It's something. It can only help us, right?" "Right," Karma answered, unsure. But the two started out towards where the objects would land. It wasn't long before the parachutes dipped out of their view. A few minutes later, and they heard noise coming over the next dune. "What is that?" Greta asked. "Motor of some sort." "I know that, but what kind of vehicle? Is it a rescue party? Are they getting us out of here?" "Doesn't sound like something large," Karma puzzled. Then her eyes widened. "Get down!" Greta wasn't about to hesitate, but before she could act, 3 dune buggies roared over the next crest, all with a pair of black-clad men. And the passengers had guns, all of which opened up on the mismatched pair, trapped in the desert. Part 3 of Child of the Stars, Woman of the World comes to an end with some answers, but even more questions. Is Karma really telling the truth about her motivations? What is really going on inside her mind? And can she and Greta get away from these mysterious attackers? Find out next time on the Mirage Barrage.